Hello. Today we are going to be talking about self-binding and willpower, and which one is right for you in terms of curing addiction and finally fixing that part of your life. Let's go. So first we'll talk about self-binding. So self-binding is essentially, as the name suggests, the practice of binding yourself. Okay? And by the way, all of the information that I've got about self-binding is from Dr. Anna Lemke's book called Dopamine Nation. It's a great book. I highly recommend you read it. So yeah, all credit goes to her for this section. So there's three kinds of self-binding that she describes in the book. There's physical, chronological, and categorical. So physical self-binding is basically where you create a physical barrier between yourself and the addiction. So, for example, someone who is addicted to alcohol, for example, they might keep all alcohol out of the house, and that would be physical self-binding because they're creating a physical a barrier between them and the addiction. So this is you. This is, let's say, your addiction is this bottle of alcohol, and you want to maximize the distance, whether that be, literal physical distance, or just the difficulty in physically getting to that addiction. So that's the first one, physical self-binding. She also gives a really nice example here of Odysseus. So when he was traveling with his crew, he had to essentially go past these sirens, which are like these bird creature type things. So basically, he was traveling in a ship with his crew, and he knew that in order to defeat the sirens, he had to hear the song of the sirens and stay alive. But the problem is no one who's ever heard the song of the sirens is able to successfully stay alive, because everyone basically, like, if that's the siren, like that's a bird, you just like go towards it, I think, and then they kill you. And it's like impossible to resist the song of the siren. So what he had his crew members do is he had them essentially plug their ears and tie him to the mast of the ship so that he could hear the song of the sirens, but he wouldn't be able to go because he knew that he wouldn't be able to resist it. So he used physical self-binding in this case. Now, the second one is chronological self-binding, and I think this one is really good with specific addictions that have become habitual to specific parts of your daily or weekly or monthly routine. So, for example, let's say you know that you used to maybe only drink a couple times on weekends, but now it's becoming weekdays as well. Maybe part of that self-binding could be going back to only drinking on Saturday and Sunday, right? So only drinking on the weekends. Same thing goes with like sugar. You can tell yourself chronologically, I know that, let's say my sleep gets really messed up if I eat sugar right before bed. So I'm going to say no sugar after 5 p.m. or, caffeine, anything like that. Basically what you're doing is you're restricting your exposure to the addiction to a certain time of day or week, etc. So that's the second one, chronological self-binding, again, based on time. The third one is categorical self-binding, and this is where you basically eliminate an entire category of addictions from your life. So, for example, if someone is addicted to gambling, all right, that's a die. If someone is addicted to gambling, one way that they could categorically self-bind themselves would be to never visit casinos, to, let's say if they're like, I think one example she used was like a sports bettor. So like if you're really into like sports betting and you've gotten addicted, then don't look at the sports news, don't watch sports anymore, temporarily, just to self-bind and distance yourself from the addiction as much as possible. So basically all these three are distancing yourself from the addiction. And you could just completely abstain, but these ways essentially make it less draining of your willpower and more sort of concrete and formulaic, because you're specifically restricting sugar to only before 5 p.m., but it's not this whole daunting task of I can never eat sugar. So self-binding is really good because it removes the mental drain of making a choice. When you self-bind yourself, for example, with this example with Odysseus, no matter what choice he made, whether to go or not, it didn't matter. And so he no longer had to sort of resist the urges of the siren, because he knew that even if he didn't resist the urges, he wouldn't be able to actually go to the siren and get killed, right? It's the exact same thing. You know that when you practice self-binding, even if you do feel urges, you won't actually, relapse on your addiction. So that is one of the major benefits of self-binding, is it removes this whole mental drain. Willpower can be especially mentally draining because it can really feel like a full-time job. If you're on a diet, you can feel like it's just on your mind all day. Like, I really want to eat, I really want to eat, I really want to eat, right? So when you essentially practice self-binding, then you remove that decision so that you no longer have to think about it all the time. And the second thing is that it makes it almost impossible to indulge. So this is really, really important, and we'll get to this more in a second. This is really, really important for like very strong addictions. For example, again, with Odysseus, this is an extremely strong addiction. No one in human history has ever been able to resist the call of the siren. However, Odysseus knows this, and so he purposefully practices self-binding so that he is unable to indulge. He is unable to essentially listen to these impulses, right? So with addiction, it's the exact same thing. If you practice self-binding, you are removing the opportunity, the choice itself for you to indulge. So whether you feel incredibly obliged to indulge or not, you will still not indulge because you simply can't, because you've self-bound. So that is self-binding. Now let's go into willpower. Willpower, in very simple terms, is the skill of existing with temptation in your mind. So you're here, you feel temptation, and you have the opportunity to indulge in that temptation. You really have a big sugar craving, and there's a candy bar right in front of you. Willpower is the skill of existing in this state without indulging. So, if you have a major sugar craving, willpower would be you sitting there with a candy bar in front of you and not eating it. That is willpower. Hiding away from candy bars or removing candy bars from your environment would be more like self-binding. So willpower is primarily useful in cases where you don't have a choice to eliminate it entirely from your life. For example, we can take sugar, right? Sugar, let's say you decide, okay, I'm going to stop eating sugar. If you live with your family, guess what? You can't remove all sugar from the house. Your family still wants to eat sugar. So there's always going to be sugar around you. Anytime you go to a social event, a birthday party, anything like that, there's always going to be sugar around you. And so you can't just self-bind and rely on that, because you know for a fact that when the opportunity arises, you do not have this skill, because willpower is a skill. You do not have the skill of willpower built well enough to actually resist this temptation. So let's get into some decision criteria, and this will really clear up the difference between willpower and self-binding, as well as which is better in which cases. The two main decision criteria are, number one, is it something you can realistically avoid forever? And number two, is your addiction stronger than yourself? So number one, is it something you can realistically avoid forever? This is exactly what I was talking about with sugar, right? If you know for a fact that sugar is always going to be a part of your life, and I guarantee for 99.999% of people, there will be always some temptation of sugar in your environment, then understand that self-binding by itself will not suffice, because you are going to eventually be exposed to an environment in which you are exposed to sugar, and in that environment, you will not be able to resist temptation because you have not built up the skill of willpower. So, is it something you can realistically avoid forever? If yes, then self-binding is a fine approach on its own. If no, then understand you will need to build up willpower eventually. Now, the second thing is your addiction stronger than yourself? In other words, are you able to successfully resist temptation on your own? Chances are, if you're watching this video, probably not, right? And I'll get to an approach that works really well in a second for if you're not able to resist temptation, but at the same time, you can't realistically avoid this forever. If your addiction is stronger than yourself, so for example, let's say you've gotten like a physical addiction, literally with like withdrawal symptoms and everything, to like hard drugs or alcohol, something like that. In that case, your addiction is stronger than yourself because you are finding it incredibly difficult to quit. You literally experience withdrawal symptoms. And so in this case, willpower itself, at the level that I'm assuming you're at, you probably don't have enough willpower to push through that and to successfully, get through withdrawal, all that, right? You're most likely going to relapse. And understanding that is the key to getting free of addiction, right? Ego is a very big problem in fighting addiction because a lot of people get motivated one day and they think, okay, yes, I can resist. And then they build up this ego. No, I don't need self-binding. I don't need any of that. I can do it myself with willpower. But then willpower does get depleted over time. However, just like your energy in the gym gets depleted over time, you build it up because that's how muscle building works. It's the exact same thing with willpower. Willpower does get depleted, but then it gets better. You build it up like muscle in the gym. So, willpower does get depleted. Therefore, if you do not have enough willpower, if you have not built up the skill of willpower, and you are facing an addiction that is stronger than yourself, understand that you are almost guaranteed to relapse. So in this case, if your addiction is stronger than yourself, then again, we go for self-binding. And if it is not stronger than you and you feel like you can successfully resist it with willpower alone, then yes, we go for willpower. And in this case, you could also go for self-binding. So we can almost create a chart. This is a void. And this is whether it's stronger than you. So we'll say strong. So if you can avoid it, we'll do checks, X, check, and X. So if you can successfully avoid your temptation using willpower alone, and it has a strong hold on you, then that's kind of contradictory, right? Because you know that it has a strong hold on you and you cannot avoid it. You know that you can avoid it forever, realistically, because it's so outside of the normal realm of living. And you know that it has a strong hold on you. So in this case, self-binding is completely perfect because, let's say, for example, it's hard drugs, right? If you decide to quit hard drugs, it's not like they're going to keep popping up in your life and temptations are going to keep coming. You can completely distance yourself from that circle and never come up with a temptation to do that again. If it's something that you can avoid easily in your life and you don't have a very strong temptation for it, then again, self-binding or willpower would work. If you don't have a strong temptation for it, and it's not something you can easily avoid in your life, as in it's something that you experience regularly, for example, sugar. Many people don't have a very strong temptation for sugar, but it's not something they can avoid either. Then in that case, willpower is the way to go, because you can build willpower successfully without risk of relapse, and you're building up this capacity. But this is really where things get difficult. It's not something you can avoid in your life entirely, right? It is there present in your life, and you will experience it inevitably. But at the same time, it has such a strong hold on yourself that you will inevitably relapse if you rely on willpower alone. So, with this specific type, if you rely on self-binding, then you removed it from your environment, either chronologically, categorically, or physically, and you've been self-binding, but the problem comes when you experience it in the real world. A great example of this kind of addiction, by the way, where there's a strong pull towards it and it's hard to avoid, is alcohol, because alcohol is ever present in social life, and it is also, for people who are addicted, it's a very, very strong addiction. So, let's say, hypothetically, you use self-binding for an alcohol addiction. In this case, you've removed alcohol from your environment, and when you're alone, maybe you don't drink anymore. Congratulations. When you go to any sort of social event when people are drinking, you are inevitably going to get that temptation to drink because you have not built up willpower. You haven't built up willpower because it's too hard. Because if you tried to go with just willpower, you would end up constantly relapsing, and that would just be even worse. So, you realize that if I go to this social event where people are drinking, then I can't resist myself. I can't resist the temptation of alcohol. I will end up drinking because I have not built up the skill of existing with temptation without indulging in it. So you might think here, the solution is I just don't go to all these social events. I cut out these friends entirely, and that's the end of the story. But there is a better way, because honestly, cutting out every single circumstance is unrealistic in certain cases, and it is quite a bit of a self-limitation, especially because there's not a guarantee that you'll be able to cut out every single circumstance. Sure, you might know that, okay, people are going to be drinking at this party, so I won't go to this party. But let's say one day you're traveling. Okay, let's say one day you travel to an entirely different country. Maybe you're with some family, some friends, and then there they decide to drink, and you had no idea this was going to happen. Things will inevitably come up, and you will not be able to avoid every possible hypothetical situation in which your temptation may arise. So then, we know that self-binding does not work because when you get into a situation where self-binding no longer works, in other words, when the temptation is in front of you, when you've no longer distanced yourself, then you are not able to successfully resist temptation because you have not built up willpower. So then we might think the real solution is to build up willpower. But, as I just mentioned, the problem with willpower is when you start off with a low level of willpower, which you are at because you started off with this addiction, meaning you've constantly been indulging, when you start off with a relatively low level of willpower, it is incredibly easy to relapse. And so you'll find that you'll just keep relapsing. You'll keep going back to the alcohol over and over and over again if you rely on willpower alone. So we don't even get to this stage when we try willpower alone. We don't even get to the stage where we're without alcohol and then we find temptation. We just keep trying to resist and we keep relapsing because we are not strong enough yet. It's like if you go into the gym and you try to squat, okay, I know that's not squatting, but let's say you're in the gym and you're trying to lift 500 pounds. That's really hard, right? If you're trying to lift 500 pounds, that's really hard. You fail. You can't lift it. So then you stop. And then the next day you go to the gym and you try to lift 500 pounds again and again and again, day after day. You're never going to get it, right? You're never going to get this 500 pounds. The only way you would be able to get to 500 pounds is by starting with a really light weight, and then you slowly build up from there, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, heavier and heavier and heavier weights until you can lift that 500 pounds. And by the way, I discussed that whole strategy in my mental health book, top link in the description. So, with alcohol or any other temptation that has a strong hold on you and you can't avoid it easily, the key word here is it has a strong hold on you. In other words, it is a heavy weight for you to lift. It is very tempting for you. And so by using willpower alone, by constantly trying to lift up 500 pounds, you're never going to get it. You have to start small. However, starting small is also quite a complicated process, right? We can't just say, how do you start small with alcohol? Alcohol is an addiction, right? Alcohol is alcohol, no matter how small you start. Whether you tempt yourself with one sip or one bottle, you're still tempting yourself with a strong enemy. And so the solution is both. Specifically for this area in which it has a strong hold on you and in which it is not possible to avoid in your daily life. So some examples of this, it really just depends on the person. Like I mentioned, sugar doesn't really have a strong hold on most people, but for some people, it might have an incredibly strong hold. You might be able to resist sugar for maybe just a day before you relapse and continue eating sugar, and it's so, so hard for you to quit. It can be anything. It could be scrolling, any sort of addiction that has a strong hold on you, a very strong temptation, and is ever present in your daily life, regardless of whether you choose to have it there or not, like sugar, like alcohol, etc. That is when you use both. So, the solution here is you use temporary self-binding, and then you go into willpower building. So if we go back to our example of the self-binding guy with the social event, we can see that he built up some level of self-binding for himself, right? He started self-binding, and that was going well for him. However, what he did not build up was willpower, and that is why he failed at this social event. What he actually should have done is start off with self-binding, right? Because again, we do not want to relapse. Relapsing is a big no-no. So we start off with self-binding, in which maybe he decides, I'm never going to buy alcohol from the store, or, I'm only going to drink on weekends. He says, I'm removing all alcohol from the house. I'm just going to keep like one bottle of wine locked up in a safe, whatever, right? He self-binds. Then, because he knows that he can't resist alcohol forever, he can't keep running away and hiding, it's going to come eventually, he starts building up willpower. So, sorry, I didn't like his smile, so we're just going to make this guy again. Okay. He starts building up willpower. He starts slowly exposing himself to the addiction, and unlike this guy who relapses, he's actually able to successfully resist temptation. Now you might be wondering, why? It's because he started off with self-binding. When you go on a diet where you're eating 0 sugar, for the first 2 weeks you'll have incredible cravings. After that, the cravings almost go away entirely. It's the exact same thing with other addictions, maybe not on that same time scale, but the same principle applies. When you self-bind for a certain amount of time, you are essentially reducing your risk of relapse to 0, so you can't relapse, and then you lose the temptation for it. So then you can gradually begin exposing yourself. Maybe you start bringing alcohol into the house, you leave some beer in the fridge, but you never actually indulge in it. Maybe you go to that social event where everyone's eating birthday cake and donuts, but you don't actually eat it because you haven't eaten sugar for a while, and so the pull that sugar has on you is significantly less. So that is how temporary self-binding into willpower works. You start off with self-binding until your the pull of the addiction is diminished, and then from there you can go into willpower building without fear of relapse, without this idea that, if I put it in my environment at all, I'm done for. You need to have self-bound for long enough to where the temptation for that addiction has gone away sufficiently to where you can try exposing yourself to it and building up willpower without risk of relapse. So how it actually works is you slowly decrease the friction to avoid relapse, and this builds willpower simultaneously. So, for example, let's say you are addicted to sugar. Okay, sugar is this big addiction for you, and you've been self-binding for a while. Let's say you haven't eaten sugar for a whole month. You've physically self-binded, you haven't brought any sugar into the house, and you've successfully resisted sugar for a month. From there, you want to start reintroducing sugar, not into your life, but into the environment around you, so that you know how you can successfully use willpower to resist your sugar temptation. So we start slow. We slowly decrease the friction between us and the addiction. Imagine this is you, and this is the addiction. we slowly decrease the distance to where eventually you are living with the addiction right in front of you and you are successfully able to resist it. So let me give you an example. Let's say you've been self-binding and things have been going great. Now you decide you want to expose yourself to a little bit of sugar, and you are making it so that you can build up willpower by exposing yourself. The smart thing to do, or let me actually start with the not so smart thing to do. The not smart thing to do would be to buy a bunch of sugary stuff, sit with it right in front of you, because in a non-severe addiction, that is completely fine. I actually recommend that in my book for anyone who doesn't have a severe addiction. Literally sit with your temptation right in front of you. But let's say sugar has taken control of your life completely. You need to start slow. So maybe you say, okay, I need to tempt myself with some sugar. I need to give myself the opportunity to eat sugar, and then I need to resist that. So maybe you start by saying, okay, there's this one bakery. Let's say your favorite sugary treat was donuts. There's this one donut shop that is 25 miles away or something like that. There's this one bakery that is 25 miles away. I'm going to start by saying I can only have sugar at that specific donut shop. Okay. Now you might be wondering, well, isn't that just like reintroducing sugar into your life? Isn't that the same thing? No, it's easier, because guess what? When you experience a sugar craving, normally, there's one of three things that'll happen. The first case is it's not in your environment, in which case you're not building up willpower at all. So that's case one. The second case is where sugar is in your environment, and because you've not built up willpower slowly, you end up relapsing and eating the sugar because it's too big of a temptation for you. So in this case, you actually don't build willpower either, right? The guy who tries to lift 500 pounds and ends up not lifting it doesn't really build any muscle or any strength, right? If you fail, you're not actually building up the willpower. The third case is with this hypothetical 25 miles. In this case, you are creating friction between yourself and the addiction. You are going from, I'm not eating any sugar, to now, yes, I can eat sugar, but only in this one very specific scenario. And so let's say you get the temptation. In this case, you got the temptation, but you couldn't do it, but you didn't build up any willpower in the first place, which is just the exact same problem that we had with self-binding alone. In the second case, you got the temptation, you were unable to resist it, and so you didn't build up willpower. In the third case, you get the temptation, you sit down in your car, you turn it on, you start driving. It's a 25-mile drive out there to this donut shop. 25 whole miles. Do you not think you're going to be having second thoughts every single second of that drive? I shouldn't do it. I shouldn't do it. I shouldn't do it. I shouldn't be going here right now. I'm going to turn back. I need to turn back. I can't do this. I'm not going to do it. You're creating friction. You are creating a longer distance, a physical barrier, and a longer time between you and the addiction, to where that's a donut, to where now you have a longer period of time to ruminate about the addiction and to finally come to terms with the fact that I shouldn't be doing this in the first place. So then you turn back, and guess what? That's a successful resistance. So guess what you just did? You built up willpower. Congrats. You built up willpower. In these other two scenarios, you did not build up willpower. The only case where you did build up willpower was with enough friction to where it was difficult to resist, but you were able to resist. Okay? So we start off with high levels of friction. Then from there, we slowly decrease the friction. So we can take this quite literally. We can just decrease the number of miles, right? We can say with chronological self-binding, maybe you go from never drinking alcohol, like completely abstaining, to now I can only drink at exact from this very specific period of 4:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Sundays. Okay, 4:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. on the second Sunday of the month, whatever you want to do, right? And then from there, you slowly increase the time window so that you are essentially decreasing the friction between you and the addiction, and you're slowly increasing your willpower. You're starting off with a really light weight because the more friction, the easier it is to resist. And then from there, you're gradually increasing the weight until you can fully resist this addiction with you looking at it directly right in front of you. So that's the first thing, is reducing friction slowly to build up willpower until eventually you can successfully resist the temptation just like a normal person would, with it being right in front of you. Now, when do we transition away from self-binding? Well, we transition away when urges begin to go away. If you transition away too early, what'll happen is what happened in this case, where if you just try to go with willpower alone, you end up relapsing because you haven't built up sufficient distance between yourself and the addiction. You haven't built up enough time away from the addiction. So you need to self-bind for long enough that you no longer get crazy strong temptations and you're able to successfully practice willpower. You don't just instantly relapse. But at the same time, if you wait too long for self-binding, then you're just sacrificing time that could have been used for willpower building instead, and you're essentially making your journey longer. So the rule for self-binding is you begin using willpower instead of self-binding when the urges for that addiction go away. When you stop craving sugar, that is when you begin to reintroduce the possibility of having it in your life. When you stop craving scrolling, that is when you re-download TikTok on your phone and say, I can only scroll for this specific time on this specific day. Do you see what we're doing? You create the friction and you move away with self-binding into friction when the urges go away, because that's the whole point of doing the self-binding in the first place. Otherwise, we would just go straight into willpower, but we know that going straight into willpower doesn't work because you relapse. So the whole point in doing self-binding first is to make the urges decrease or go away entirely. Once those urges go away, that is when we can go into willpower. So the simple key here, do self-binding until the urges go away. And by the way, this applies to removing friction as well. So let's say with our guy who was eating the donuts, let's say he's gotten into his car a couple times, driven down, but he's never actually resisted. He's never actually indulged in sugar. He's been able to resist every single time because of the friction. Now that he no longer gets the urges, and now that he knows he has 100% success rate, now he's like, oh yeah, no, 25 miles, I just won't do it. I won't do it because I know I've tried it in the past and I've never been able to successfully indulge in my sugar temptation. I've always been able to resist it. That is when you start to decrease the friction, make it easier for yourself to indulge. So your sign to progress and make things a little bit harder for yourself, a little bit easier to indulge in the temptation, is when the urges start to go away. That way, you're not left just lifting this light weight all the time. You are actually building up over time. And finally, immediate relapse is a warning sign. So let's say you go away from self-binding, you find that you don't have any urges, maybe your sugar cravings are entirely gone, and you decide, okay, I'm going to do the 25-mile thing with this one specific donut shop, whatever. And let's say literally on like the first or second day, you relapse. You eat sugar again, right? In this case, understand that you started when you were not ready because your urges were still too strong. You need to self-bind to the point where your urges are weak enough to where you can successfully resist them. Self-binding with urges, the longer that you self-bind, if this is time and this is urge, the longer that you self-bind, the lower your urges become. And it's kind of like that, right? So once you've come to the point, let's say your threshold is this, like at anything below this point of urges, I know that I can resist. Now you know that once you've successfully reached this point in time right here, where the urges successfully become below your threshold, now you can go out and build willpower, because now you know that you'll be able to successfully resist and you won't immediately relapse. If you do immediately relapse, that is okay. Okay, that is fine. Just understand that you need to self-bind longer for next time. Understand that you weren't quite ready. Just take it as a learning opportunity and move on from there. So that was the video. We covered self-binding and willpower. Self-binding, there's physical, chronological, and categorical. It removes the mental drain of making a choice, and most importantly, it makes it almost impossible to indulge or relapse. So this is really good for strong addictions. We talked about willpower and how willpower is the skill of existing with temptation and not indulging in that temptation. We talked about some decision criteria on whether you can realistically avoid this temptation from your life forever, and whether your addiction is stronger than yourself. And we talked about in these cases, what do you do? If you're able to successfully avoid it and it's very strong, then you use self-binding. If you're able to successfully avoid it and it's not very strong, then you can use self-binding or willpower. If it is not strong and you're not able to successfully avoid it, then you have to use willpower, because you have to learn to avoid it in your life when it is exposed to you, because it will inevitably be exposed to you. And then we talked about this sort of gray zone here and how the best opportunity to get rid of your addiction in this case is using both. Temporary self-binding, and then when the urges go away, you go into willpower. Slowly decrease the friction to avoid relapse, just enough to where you don't have urges, but it's still tempting, and that will build willpower over time. And immediate relapse is a warning sign. Note that immediate relapse means you should be self-binding for longer. And once again, thanks to Dr. Anna Lemke for providing all this information for self-binding, etc. in her book, Dopamine Nation. Definitely check that out. Last thing, top link in the description is my full mental health book. We go in depth on this level of protocols, specifically like in the willpower chapter, for example, we talk about resisting addiction, specific protocols for addictions such as video games, junk food, sugar, scrolling, etc., as well as general willpower principles. And we talk about, in this level of detail, how you go about resisting temptation, how you go about fighting an addiction, how do you go about building up willpower. I talked a little bit briefly on how you build up willpower, but we go in way more detail in the book on specifically what do you do to actually build up willpower over time in a way that minimizes your chance of relapse and maximizes your willpower development. And by the way, willpower is just one of the 6 chapters in my book. We have chapters on every single important mental health capacity that you should develop, skills like willpower, and we go in this level of depth and detail into the book. So if you found this video helpful, if you feel like this information is really good, and you learned something useful from this video, you want to learn more about mental health, you want to learn more about addiction and willpower, then I highly suggest you check out that link in the description. That will be the full mental health book, and you can buy it, and that will be a really great source of education. That's all, and I will see you in the next video.